So good to be here with you. You know who I am. I'm Paul McGinnis. Is excited to be here again, excited to wrap up this series, and excited especially to again introduce you to my wife. If you were here in the beginning of this series, you remember that we kind of kicked off this Adam and Eve series, and now to help us wrap things up, just would you help me welcome my wife, Amy McGinnis. So good to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you. Although I must say, it's good to be here, but I'd much prefer being in the front row, looking up at my husband than sitting alongside him. But it'll be good to kind of experience what he experiences on a weekend. So it's good to be here. So sometimes that's actually how it feels, the way that video presented it, when we're speaking to a man and we're a woman, because men and women are so very different, and especially when it comes to communication. We're very different.
Oftentimes, women will say one thing and men hear something totally different. And so let's just give you some examples. Some of these actually coming from our own marriage, but we won't tell you which ones. You can figure that out yourself. But sometimes a woman will say,
"Don't forget to lock the house."
And all the man hears is, "Don't forget to lock the house, you stupid idiot."
Or I would say, "Are you really going to wear that? Maybe you should wear this instead."
And the way that translates is, "I pick out the clothes for all the children. Why don't you just let me pick your clothes out as well, honey?"
Or a woman might say, "I cannot believe how big and beautiful that house is."
And a man starts feeling insecure, and it sounds like she's saying, "What is this dump that we're living in? Is this the best you can do? Is this what I'm worth? Is this how you provide for me?"
Or I might say, "Hey, there's somebody over there. Why don't you just pull over and we'll ask for directions. Maybe he can tell us how to get there."
And all he hears is, "You're not man enough to get us where we need to go. Maybe the gas station guy is man enough to do that."
Oh, that
You
is
see what
not
I'm
at
saying?
all what I'm saying.
I realize that now, but that's how it comes across. And ladies, I really believe that you mean well and you're trying to help, but you need to understand some of the things that get lost in translation. And I know it's not your fault, but I want you to see for a second what's going on beneath the surface, why the men in your life kind of translate things differently. And just a quick aside, in case you're just jumping in at the very end of this series, you need to realize we are equal opportunity. And we're going to be focusing on women pretty strongly today and what they can do differently and how they can approach their marriages. But we did the same thing for 3 weeks to the men, focusing on them. So go back, check out the website, check out the entire series. But what we do want to do today is just offer some tips and some help for the women. And just to begin, I want to just read some quotes from some books that really pull back the veil and let you know what's going on in the heart of a man. The first one coming from a book by John Eldredge. He says this: "Men are posers, each playing the part to the best of his ability, always wondering when they will be found out. The question they ask, even if they can't put it into words, is, do I have what it takes? Most men live their lives haunted by this question or crippled by the answer that they've been given."
Shanti Feldhahn, in her book For Women Only, puts it this way: "Men hide a deep insecurity which leaves even the most confident man dreading the moment when he will be exposed for who he truly is, or at least believes himself to be, an imposter. This comes from a conviction that men feel they are being watched and evaluated, judged at all times as if in competition, and that they're just one mess up away from being found out. He feels he constantly has to prove himself and his manhood. The idea of someone thinking he can't cut it is humiliating, a feeling every man wants to avoid at all costs."
One more book, and yet, not surprisingly, the same theme. Dr. John Gray says in his book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, a man's deepest fear is that he's not good enough, or that he is incompetent. He has an inborn fear of failure. Man, I don't know if that resonates with you, but I can tell you I could go back to the spot, the very time where I recognized that fear within myself. I was a senior in high school. I was at a summer camp, and I remember having one of those introspective moments, one of those, open conversations with someone, and they throw out the question, "What's your biggest fear?" And I have no idea why. I had never answered that question this way before, but one word came to mind, and it was insignificance. I just had this fear that my life really wouldn't matter, that I wouldn't make a difference, that I wasn't up for it, that I wasn't good enough. And that is what all these authors are saying. And that, ladies, is what's going on in the heart of the men in your life. And you need to realize that anything that you say, either knowingly or unknowingly, that kind of contributes to that makes him feel insignificant, incompetent, not up to the task. It gets so close to that hole, so close to that fear, that he's immediately going to become defensive and reactive. And I'm not saying that that's right. We need to navigate that ourselves. But you just need to realize who you're dealing with here. But let me flip that over and show you the great opportunity that you have. Because if you realize that that's his greatest fear, that there's that hole deep within, then you should also realize that any words of affirmation or praise, of commendation, any kind of confidence you can build, I mean, that fills that hole, and it gives so much energy and life so that we can move forward. And so it should come as no surprise that the God who created Adam and Eve, the God who created us, knowing that we'd have these insecurities, prescribes the very thing that men need. And so take us to that verse in Ephesians.
That's right. A couple weeks ago, you may remember on Mother's Day, we talked about Ephesians 5:33. And the first part of that verse says, "Each one of you, husbands, also must love his wife as he loves himself." And Mark Fitch did a great job unpacking that verse and just helping men understand how they can love their wives in a way that their wives will appreciate and understand. Well, today we're going to look at the second part of that verse. We're going to help the women in the room to understand how they can love their husbands in a way that their husbands will appreciate, in a language that their husbands speak. And the second part of the verse says this, "And the wife must respect her husband."
That's it right there. I mean, he nails it. Just that one word, respect. That's the language we speak. That's what we need to hear. And so today the focus will be specifically to wives, to offer that to their husbands. There's also help here for those of you that are single and maybe looking towards marriage. But I think even help those of you that have men or boys in your life need to realize some of these facets of what's going on in their hearts. What they need more than anything else is respect. Right, Aretha? R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Suck it to me, suck it to me, suck it to me. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do that
well,
today.
We could do that. Love that song. And what you may not know about it, though Aretha Franklin, a woman, made it popular, it was not written by her. It was written by a man, by Otis Redding, the king of soul, a man who understood the need for respect. And so, men, this is our chance, this is my chance to just share with some of the ladies, some of the women here, what we need to be receiving from them so that they can start speaking our language. And we're just going to move through that word one letter at a time and just give you some tips and some practical advice. I want to just say before we move any further that we're not here as experts. We have not figured all this out. We are still learning as we go. After 15 years of marriage, we still kind of get the signals crossed and get the communication wrong. So we're right there with you, just sharing some insights, some things that we're learning, some things we found in our reading and in the scriptures. And so we're right there on the journey with you. But let's start with the R. And when we talk about R, I want you to remember the word regardless. Offer that respect regardless. And the idea here is unconditional respect. And that phrase itself might sound a little strange to you. We're very familiar with unconditional love, right? With offering that even when people are unlovely or unlovable, or even when we've been hurt by them. We know that God calls us to offer love. And yet when it comes to respect, we begin to think, well, they need to earn my respect. They need to show that they're respectable. And yet that concept is nowhere in the scripture. That's not something that we get from God. He says, women, wives, respect your husbands. He doesn't say if they earn it, if they deserve it. This is something that we need to offer, that wives need to offer their husbands. Find the image of God in his heart. Find the things that he's doing well or trying to do well, and just choose to offer that respect, whether you feel like it or not. And you'll be amazed at what happens. That kind of respect, when it's given unconditionally, promotes love. And that promotes more respect. And it just goes back and forth. It's a beautiful cycle. Now, I know that this is very challenging, especially for those of you who might be in a spiritually split family, right? Maybe you as the wife are pursuing Christ and are moving towards him, and your character is being shaped by his Spirit and his word, and yet your husband might not share that yet, might not be on that same journey. I know this is especially challenging for you, but I want to offer you the encouragement to offer that respect anyway, regardless. because you never know how God could use your character, use that love and respect to turn his heart around. And you've seen that firsthand, haven't you?
Yes, that's true. It was true for me growing up. My mother was following Christ and had made a commitment to Christ, but my dad had not. Thankfully, that's not still the case, and during my high school years, my dad did profess faith in Christ, and it's just been amazing to see his transformation. So you never know. You never know what can happen. So offer respect to your husbands regardless. And that brings us to the second letter, letter E, and that's express it to him. It's great to respect your husband. It's great to admire him for who he is. It's great to notice the things that he's doing well. But really, it doesn't mean anything if he doesn't know that you're thinking those things. And it's not going to affect him if you don't actually say it. So for some of you, it's as simple as just having a conversation, just talking to him and just saying, hey, I've been thinking about you lately, and there just are a lot of things that I respect and admire about you, and I just wanted to let you know about it. And, be ready to list some of those things, because I think he probably won't let the conversation end there. I'm sure he'll probe a little bit and say,
tell me
more about that. Yeah, and be ready to share some of those things that you specifically respect about your husband. And I think that can be a conversation that he would replay in his mind to remind himself that his wife does respect and admire him. Now, for me, that's a little bit difficult because I'm very emotional, so it's hard for me to verbalize what I'm feeling inside without getting crazy and losing my train of thought and just not thinking clearly. So for me, I have to write it down. And actually going through this message, I was convicted because I do feel a lot of respect for Paul. I mean, how could I not? Look at him. He's just an amazing man. I admire him and respect him. But I often leave it unsaid. I think it a lot, but I don't tell him a lot. So just this week, I sat down and I got out a card and I just started to make a list of the things that I really appreciate, respect, and admire about him. And I just sent it with him to work in his lunch. And who knows, maybe that'll be a card that he keeps for a long time and just, you still have it right
here,
there.
In fact, I was just surprised it was so short.
Well, I ran out of space. I ran out of space. But the times in his life when he's feeling disrespected in other parts of his life, hopefully that'll be something that he can have to take out and remind himself that his wife really respects and admires him for so many things.
And it's absolutely true, and I'm just kidding about the size of it. It means a lot. When I saw that in there, it is one that I'm going to keep, and that does mean a lot because, women, what you need to understand is that we don't just count opinions, we weigh opinions, right? Different opinions mean different things, feel different if they're coming from different people. It doesn't matter all that much if strangers think well of us or if our coworkers. What we want to hear more than anything else is that those closest to us respect us the most. And so when we hear those words of affirmation, those words of respect coming from our wife, those mean more than anything else. And that's true for me, and I would guess that is true for most of the men here. In fact, I'll just give you one story to illustrate that, and you might not even realize this, but guys, we're getting into lawn mowing season finally, and so we've gotten the lawn mowers out, and you've probably got your system of how you do the lawn, right? You start at the side, and you do that vertical stripes, and then at the back, you got the horizontal stripes going, or maybe some of you do the concentric circle approach. I don't know. It depends on your yard and whatnot. And so I do the side of the yard, and then I do the back of the yard, then I do the other side, and in all those, I'm just doing straight lines back and forth, either parallel to the house or parallel to the road. But when I get to the front yard, I do something differently. I go with a diagonal approach. You should swing by and see it sometime. I do the diagonal. It's a little more challenging, but to this day, I do it that way. And every time I mow the lawn, I do the diagonals in the front. Do you know why? Because the very first time that I did it, 10 years ago, Amy noticed, and she didn't just notice, she said, wow, I really like how you did the lawn in the front. The diagonals look so cool. And it sounds so silly, and I bet she didn't plan that. But to this day, 10 years later, every time I get to the front, no, I can't do the verticals. I can't do the horizontals. I can't let her down. I got to do the diagonal lines because she happened to just say that to me, and I can't forget it. And so I'll do it each time. That's how important it is. That's how valuable it is. And let me just say one more quick aside. This is not just true for the men in your life. This is true for the boys in your life as well. It's probably true for everyone, but the boys in your life especially have that question of, are they good enough? And they need to hear from you their moms and dads, their uncles, their mentors, their aunts. They need to hear from you what they're good at and how they're good and how you respect them and how you can see God's imprint in their hearts. So don't just feel those things, express it.
All right, we're going to kick it up a notch just a little bit here because it's great to express that to him. But even a little bit more difficult, but equally as important, is say it to others. That's what the S is, say it to others. How do you speak about your husband when he's not around? When you talk on the phone with your parents? How do you talk about your husband? When you're with your kids? What light do you paint your husband in? When you're with a group of other women, what are you saying about your husbands? Because I know how it is when women get together, if the topic of husbands come up. I'm sad to say that more often than not, the tone of the conversation is negative. You know, we're talking about our husband's shortcomings. We're talking about things that bother us about our husband, what they're not doing at home. And, you know, misery loves company, so it just kind of spirals downward. And, you know, it's just a big husband bashing time. But what if we were to switch that around? What if when the topic of our husbands came up, we praised our husbands in front of our girlfriends? What if we talked about the successes of our husbands? What if we talked about what a great husband he is and how he cares for me so well? What about if we talked about what a great father he is to the kids and how much he loves them and cares for them? You know, I think that would be a quick turnaround in the conversation. And just to let your husband know, hey, I'm not going to talk negatively about you when you're not around. You will be proud of what I say about you, whether you're in the room or whether I'm out with my girlfriends.
And if we even get a glimpse that you're talking about us in that light, believe me, you'll have plenty of more opportunities to have a girls' night out.
Nice.
You know, if that's what's going to come out of that. And think about it, not just the women, but think about it, married couples. Think about the way that we communicate about our marriage. Like, think about, what kind of image we're giving about our marriage. If we were salesmen and trying to sell this product, like, would we be selling it? Like, if I were single, I don't know that I would get married just based on the feedback I get from married couples. I'll ask couples often, how's your marriage going? How are things with your spouse? And you know what I'm not hearing? I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm, honestly. Right? If we were car salesmen, or if a car salesman talked about marriage, talked about the car the way we talk about marriage, you'd never buy it, right? Imagine you're on the sales lot, and the car salesman, tell me a little bit about this car, and he says, well, yeah, this car, it takes work. It takes a lot of work. I'll tell you that for sure. And you got your good days and your bad days, but stick with it, because it'll get you there. Yeah, nobody would say that. We'd never buy a car if that's what people are saying about it, right? You ask married couples, and at best, they're going to tell you, so far so good. Right? Real reassuring. Thank you. And so I think all of us just need to think through the way that we communicate about our relationship. And certainly, women, the way you communicate about your husbands, and I think this goes vice versa for the husbands as well. Think about what we're communicating and how we're expressing ourselves to say it to each other and to say it to others. A great way that you can show respect.
Well, what if you're sitting there right now and you're thinking, well, this doesn't really apply to me because honestly, I cannot think of anything that I respect about my husband. I can't think of anything that I could say to him that I respect, or let alone say to others. And, if you're thinking that, if you're sitting there thinking that, then it's likely that you've been deeply hurt in the past by your husband. And it's very difficult for you to move beyond that, to think positively about your husband and to find things that you respect about him. And I don't want to make light of that situation. But I just do want to say that sometimes we train our minds. We can train our minds to think negatively. For instance, your husband does something in the past that really hurts you. And you put it in your brain and you lock it in there and you're like, I'm never going to forget that. I'm never going to forget the pain that I just felt that he caused. And life goes on, but then another negative thing happens. Inevitably, it's going to happen because I know I do those things, and you're hurt again. And you just put it right up there, and you start making a mental list of all the negative things about your husband, of all the ways that he's hurt you in the past. And you keep adding to that list. And after the years go on, you have a pretty good list up there of things that you repeat over and over to yourself and maybe even rehash to other people. But think about them, and you begin to view your husband through that negative list, through that negative lens that you've built up in your mind. But what if we retrain our mind to think positively? Paul and I just went through the married people group, which was a lot of fun. It was 4 weeks, and it was just taking time out to look at our marriages and try to see how we can better them and build into them. And the last session that we did, we talked about the whatever filter. And I just want to read the verse that comes from. It's in Philippians 4:8, and this is what it says. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And what we did, I actually have my whatever filter paper here. What we did was we just picked that verse apart and we talked about those individual words, true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. And we just looked at those words and looked at our spouse through those filters and tried to answer those questions. What is true about my husband? What do I respect most about him? I love the way you treat me this way. What's noble about you? You always seem to be right when it comes to this. Or, what does your husband do that is better than anybody else? Or what does he know the most things about? And maybe it'll be difficult to come up with some things that you truly respect about your husband. But I think it is a valuable practice. It's going to be a valuable thing for you to do to begin to make that positive list in your brain, to put those things in your brain and start adding to those. Because when we have that negative list, it's very difficult, almost impossible, to see the positive things in our husband. But when we start to rehash those positive things about our husbands, the things we respect and admire about them, then we're going to notice those things a lot more, and we're going to discard the negative things. It'll just be easier to focus on those things.
Well, it seems like two things would happen. One, we start to see the things we're looking for, right? Just a silly illustration. There are not more Volkswagen Bugs out there than any other car, but my kids sure see those more often than anything else, because when they see them, they get to hit their sister, right? And so we see what we're looking for. And if you have that negative list and you're looking for that, you'll see it. And yet if you train yourself, if you're intentional about seeing the positive, and then the second thing I think that happens is that's what spills out of us. That's what we want to say to our husband. And we have something to say to our friends, or our girlfriends, or our guys, or whoever else, because we're looking for it, we're seeing it, and then we're saying it. So just in case some people are still really having trouble even getting started with that, what kinds of things should they be looking for?
Yeah, well, you can start by just asking yourself a couple questions. Does your husband have a job? Is he working? That's positive. Is he a hard worker? Does he bring home money and provide for you? When you're at home with your husband, do you feel safer than when he's gone? And just think about the God-given role that your husbands have to be the leader of your family. That is a lot of responsibility. I know that's responsibility that I'm glad I don't have, that I'm not the leader of our family. That's huge. Does your husband lead well? Is he a man of character? Is he generous? Is he kind? Those are the areas that you can think through to start finding things that you respect about your husband that you can express to him and then say it to others.
Yeah, that's good. So R, offer that respect regardless. E, express it to him. S, say it to others. And now let's move on to P. And this one I kind of had to work into the equation here. And this is where we're going to talk about showing your respect for your husband, affirming him through physical intimacy. Yeah, all right. We told you this was PG-13. Here's why, okay? And Amy is really excited that we're talking about this. In fact, she insisted that I do most of the talking on this section here. But ladies, you do need to understand that we are just wired differently when it comes to affection, when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to sex. That is on our mind a lot more than it's on your mind. In fact, I've heard it said that when a man gets home in the evening, he's got two things that he would like that evening. One is dinner, and the second is sex. Not necessarily in that order. And so that's negotiable. And I'm not saying that should rule the day, that should be how it goes, but I am just saying that you need to recognize that we at least think about this differently. and realize that just as there are some unique, specific needs that you have that we may not understand, we may not share, there are some unique, specific perspectives and needs that we have that you may not share. And this is one of them. And when we feel, when we have that connection sexually and physically, that does a whole lot to build our confidence, to build our esteem, to build our sense of self-worth.
That's good for me to hear. It's good to be reminded of that. In fact, I just went to a women's conference, and they addressed this very topic. And the workshop speaker said this: "There is something about sex that makes our husband feel loved and cared for. Our desire for our husband in this way profoundly affects his sense of well-being and confidence in all areas of life. It fills a powerful emotional need for him, just as closeness and conversation fills a powerful emotional need for women. He needs to feel wanted, and he can't feel completely loved without sexual intimacy."
Yeah, that's very true. And rather than me kind of freestyling with my own thoughts here, I'll just give you one more quote from the book called For Women Only, which I didn't read because obviously it's not for me, but Amy shared this paragraph with me, and I think it's right on. The woman, the author, says, "I believe that most of us women aren't manipulatively withholding something that we know is critical to our husband's sense of well-being. Much more likely is that after a long day at the office or a long day with the kids, we just don't feel an overwhelming desire to rip off our husband's clothes and go at it. I don't know why. I suspect we simply just don't realize the emotional consequences of our response or lack of one. We view his desire for sex more as simply a physical desire or even an insensitive demand. And once we truly comprehend the truth behind our husband's advances, we're more likely to want to respond." So I just thought it was worth mentioning because it plays a powerful part in our lives and in our hearts, that you can show your respect, your affirmation, your confidence in us by responding with that physical intimacy. Do you want to talk more about that?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
We can move on.
All right. Let's move on to letter E. And letter E, I want you to think through this phrase, engage with God. Ladies, I want to give you the encouragement to engage with God on your own. See, so often I'll hear women talk about and belittle their husband, and they're, he's just not the spiritual leader that we need. He's not leading our family spiritually. And as soon as they say that, whether or not it's true, all I know is that now they're not playing their role by the way that they're tearing him down in that. And certainly there may be other expectations, there may be other things that he could be doing differently, but I need to tell you, it's your responsibility to connect with God, to own your own spiritual formation, to take your next steps with God, to seek him with your whole heart, to get to know God. Use the tools that we're offering here, inside the notes here. Use the app notes on your own. Use them as a family if you'd like to, if that works, but use these on your own. Because I think when you're building your own heart, your own connection with God, that's gonna have an overflow effect in your family and in your marriage. I'll tell you that some of the greatest strength in our marriage is that each morning, Amy spends time dedicated to God. I bring her a cup of tea, and then I get out of the way and shut the door, try to keep the kids under control as best as I can so that she can connect with God as she reads his word, as she talks to him and journals and reads other books. That's a key part of our relationship, and one of the things that kind of affirms and strengthens me to do the same. I love this verse in 1 Peter chapter 3 where he talks to women and he says, "Your beauty should not come only from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Nothing wrong with those, but that shouldn't be where all your beauty comes from. Rather, it should come from your inner self, that unfading beauty, which is of great worth in God's sight." And so, women, if you want to show respect for your husband, if you want to continue to develop into who God is calling you to be, engage with God on your own.
All right, that brings us to letter C. And letter C is connect as a couple. Learn to like him, not just love him, which really shouldn't be that hard if you think back to when it all began. When you started interacting, you weren't husband and wife then, and you didn't fall in love with your husband on day one. You liked him. You were interested in him. You did some things together. You hung out as a couple, and you had similar activities, and you just had fun together. And sometime between then and now, I don't know what happens, but we kind of forget about that part. And, kids come and work gets stressful and takes up more time, and you forget to pour into your marriage like you used to, and you forget to just have fun together as a couple. So, women and men are very different in those areas, in the area of friendship and relating to each other. Women, we like that face-to-face friendship and relationship. We want to sit down with a cup of coffee and our good friend, and we want to talk. We want to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. We could talk forever, and we just want to catch up and chat. We don't need to be doing anything else. We just talk to each other. And men, that doesn't happen quite as much with men. Occasionally that'll happen, but more often you see men in that shoulder-to-shoulder relationship or that shoulder-to-shoulder friendship, and they're doing something together. Maybe they're participating in sports together. Maybe they're watching a game together. I don't know, what do men do? They hunt together, or
work on projects.
They work on the car together, or a construction project. And there doesn't have to be a whole lot of talking, to be honest. Maybe there's no talking. I don't know.
Fine.
But they're together, and they're actually building into each other just by being together and doing an activity together. So I want to challenge the wives in this room. Be that kind of friend to your husband. Hang out with him. Do fun things with him. If your husband likes to watch sports on TV, watch a game with him. If he likes to actually participate in sports, do it with him, or at least go cheer him on. But be that kind of friend for your husband.
It's a great investment in your marriage. It's how you can keep your relationship strong, because all those other relationships, the kids are going to move away, the careers are going to fade, the hobbies are going to get old, but hopefully you're building into this relationship over the long haul. And I'll tell you, Amy's done that really well. And I don't know how intentional it was, but it really has been a great connection for us. And it's really centered around basketball. It goes all the way back to when we were in high school, right? And all I wanted to do in my free time was go to the park down the street and play basketball. And Bryant, my brother, would do that with me sometimes, but he got bored of that. And some other friends, I wore them out. But Amy would always go with me. So I'd walk to her house, and then we'd walk to the basketball courts, and we'd play ball together. She'd get tired and go sit down and watch me practice, and then we'd walk home. And then we moved from there. I don't play as much as I used to, but we'd still watch. And I remember a time where she actually intentionally tried to learn two players from every NBA team, just commit them to memory so that, when I talked about a game or we were watching a game, she'd have some connection with that. And then beyond that, we started cheering for the same team, right? In fact, this has gone so far, she's got her own jersey, right? And so we're cheering for the San Antonio Spurs together. In fact, got a picture here of actually us going to games together. And those of you very observant will notice that this is actually a home game for the Spurs. She actually went with me. We went together to San Antonio and spent a long weekend there watching a Spurs game and just doing that together. In fact, tonight, that's where we're going to be, not in San Antonio, but in front of the TV watching our Spurs in the NBA Finals. And it's just been so neat to not have to pull away from our relationship to do that, but the fact that we're doing that together, it's been a great connection. And I'll make one more note here, as I did before, that this is also true for the young men in your lives, for the boys in your life, to do some activities together with them. I distinctly remember a time my dad took me to the park and played one-on-one basketball with me, full court. Me and my dad just running up and down the court. I beat him 20-8. I still remember the score. My favorite time as a child with my mom was when she came out in the driveway this one afternoon and played basketball with me. And she was terrible. But she laughed, and we laughed together, and I'd give her a pass, and we just had a great time because they connected with me in a language that I understood. And so, wives, connect as a couple with your husband.
All right, we're on to the last letter, letter T. And letter T is trust. Trust your husband. Follow him, release control to him, believe in him, cheer him on. I refer back to what I talked about earlier, the responsibility that God has given your husbands to lead. He ultimately is the one that's responsible for the decisions that we make. And sure, we'll talk through decisions that we have to make, and Paul doesn't make them on his own, but I need to come to the point where I say, hey, whatever you decide, I am going to support you in that. I believe in you. I know that you're going to make the best decision for our family, and I trust you. Early on in our marriage, I felt like it was my responsibility to keep Paul humble. And I've learned since that is not my job, and there are a lot of other people. Yeah, there are a lot of other people that do that job really well. And my job is not to keep him humble. My job is to cheer him on. I need to be his biggest cheerleader, and I need to let him know I believe in you and I trust you.
And I just want to wrap up this section by broadening that a little bit and saying to the women and to the men, ultimately, our trust needs to go beyond our spouse, beyond what somebody else breathes into us. But ultimately, our trust goes back to our Heavenly Father, goes back to God, and who we are in His eyes, and the identity that we have in Him. And women, we mentioned this back on Mother's Day. Even though your husbands aren't going to love you perfectly, you still need to find that love and that assurance in your Heavenly Father. And to the men, I'll say the same thing today. Your wives aren't going to offer this respect perfectly, but ultimately you need to find your identity and your significance in who God has made you to be. And so ultimately, that trust comes from Him. And that rounds out the word, respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That's what we need to feel. That's the dialect that we speak. And before we wrap up, I just want you to think for a moment. Think about what's at stake here. What weighs in the balance as you're deciding on some of these ideas or tips or things? What weighs in the balance when we talk about respect?
Yeah, what will happen if you disregard this and you just decide to keep speaking your language? If we refuse to learn the language of our husbands, then you may be fine. But perhaps your relationship is going to suffer. Your relationship with your husband, some distance is going to come between you and he. Some separation maybe, ultimately perhaps divorce. Or your husband will start looking for that respect and admiration somewhere else, maybe from someone else. And that's not something that we want to happen.
But let's flip that over a second. What could happen if you start to practice this, if you start to learn another language and your husband does the same thing? What if we start to connect in ways that our spouse can understand? Realize that this is a long-term commitment. This is a journey. We're not going to get it all right, but we start to make those attempts. Think about the connection. Think about the harmony. Think about the communication. Think about the peace and the purpose and the intimacy that happens in that kind of relationship. That's what God has called us to. That's what we can achieve with His help. And think about the picture that your marriage begins to paint, right? Because God says to husbands, love your wives as Christ has loved the church. And He says to wives, respect your husbands. And right there we get this picture. When a marriage is working well, we are able to express to the world, to give this picture of God's relationship with us. Our marriage can picture God's love for us. And think about that for a second. Christ is seen as the groom in that picture. And what does the groom offer to the bride? The groom offers to the bride love, exactly as Christ offers that love to us. And then what does the groom want back in return? What is it that we, the people of God, offer back to Christ? He wants us to believe in Him. He wants us to follow Him, to offer that level of respect and trust. And so our marriages, when they're clicking on all cylinders, our marriages are this beautiful picture of God's interaction with this world and with His people in the church. So that's what we want for you, to offer that kind of love, offer that kind of respect.
All right, I have one final thought for you, and this also comes from the book For Women Only. You know that saying, behind every good man is a great woman? Well, that is so true. If a man's wife is supportive and believes in him, he can conquer the world, or at least his little corner of it. He will do better at work, at home, everywhere.
Women, you have the opportunity to offer that to your husbands, to breathe life into them by showing that respect. And as we said several weeks ago, men, you have that same opportunity to build up your wives in the way that you love them. Why don't we close in prayer? Amy, why don't you pray for the women here, and then I'll pray for the men.
God, thank you so much for this time, and thank you for the women here. And I just pray, God, that you would help us to learn to speak this new language. Help us to learn to speak a language that our husbands will understand. Help us as we embark on this journey to show respect to our husbands.
God, we're so thankful for the gift of marriage. We're so thankful for the companionship that we can find, the purpose, the love, the intimacy, and even the fact that we can be a picture of your love for us. I just pray that you would help the men here to play the role that you've called them to play. The men that are married, that they would love their wives sacrificially, that they would love their wives unconditionally. God, I pray that our marriages would indeed be a picture of Christ's love for the church. God, and my prayer is not just for those of us that are married, but God, for all of us here, single or married, that we would find our significance in you, that we would find the love that you offer, that we would be the people that you call us to be. We thank you so much for your instruction and your presence with us. In your name we pray. Amen.